Hi, everybody. It's Stu. I just want to let you know the episode you're about to see, we had some technical difficulty with Skype. So, at several places, um, Patty's video freezes. We had some audio troubles. And after the episode was over, we talked, and she didn't have any difficulty hearing me. So, not sure where the disconnect was, but please bear with us with this episode. Unfortunately, with Skype and remote access, that's the type of things we're going to have to deal with. So, please bear with us. Enjoy the content. This is a really good episode that Patty has for us. So, and with that, here it is. Hi, everybody. It's your co-host Stu, and I'm here with the paranormalist Patty Wilson. And Patty, I don't know what the episode is going to be here today, but I'm sure you're going to tell me.
I am. It's going to be about unusual disappearances. Now, I have to tell you, I have long been a fan of disappearances. When I was 10 years old, there was a little girl that lived in a house like maybe a quarter mile from us who disappeared. And it's always been a mystery. Nobody ever figured out what happened to her. She was my age, rode on the school bus. We went to school together in the same classroom. She was a latchkey kid. And so every day her mom got home an hour and a half, 2 hours after she got home from school. They lived in a double house. The older lady that lived in the back half would let the little girl in, get the snack out mom put in the fridge for her, turn on the cartoons, and then make sure the little girl locked the door. And she would come back and forth from time to time and check on her. And on this particular day, everything happened exactly as normal. It was early spring and kind of a cool, rainy kind of a day. And the lady would later say, the elderly lady, that she saw this little girl Donna's head bobbing past her window, which caused her alarm. So she went running outside and she's like, Donna, where are you going? And Donna's like, I'm going to go meet them. And she took off, and the woman said she saw what looked like a group of teenagers sitting in a car, and she yelled, Donna, I don't think you should do this. And she said, it's all right. I know them. They're my friends. And the lady went back in to call mom and say, did you tell her she could do this? But by the time mom got, no, I did not, out of her, it was done. And these people were just all gone.
Oh.
And she was never seen again. And about 3 miles from that, up on the mountain, this was at a place called Ganister, Pennsylvania, which is right outside of my hometown.
Know where it is. Yep.
And up on the mountain, there was a farm called the Old St. Clair Farm. And my dad used to tell this story because he grew up in the area as well, about a little boy who went out to feed the chickens late one evening because he was procrastinating, and his parents were listening from the house, and then the little boy disappeared. So this is an area that was just sort of steeped in those kind of stories. And then there's a story of a disappearing house, and like all of it in like a 3-mile radius. So disappearances have always been fascinating. And then I found the books of David Paulides, the Missing 411 series, some amazing stories there, and very concerning stories. There's a story of a little girl named Marjorie who disappeared on Mother's Day, and I think it was like 1941 or something like that. Her and her family went to a picnic in a little field outside of town, which was used for that sort of thing by a lot of the townspeople. After lunch, Dad went fishing in the stream on the far side, along with several other gentlemen, and the ladies all talked for a while, then got in the cars. The kids were playing in the field, and there were little flowers out, and so the girls wanted to go pick flowers. So it was this little girl, Marjorie, and her older sister. Marjorie was about 4. Her sister was about 8. And they're picking flowers. Mom goes over and sits in her car because it's more comfortable than the ground. And she's watching the girls picking flowers. And she sees Marjorie going a little further than she's comfortable with. And she opens the window and yells, Marjorie, come back. Marjorie turns around and then is just gone. So mom goes running, gets out of the car and goes running. Marjorie, Marjorie, where are you at? I'm sure she thought at first she must have fallen or something.
Mm-hmm.
But they get over there, there's no Marjorie anyplace. She says to her sister, where did she go? And she's like, I don't know. She's just not there. And then the ladies hear her, crying out, looking for her daughter. So they come and join. The husbands come and join. Marjorie was never found.
Oh.
And so I've always been fascinated. So these are some very bizarre stories of disappearances. These stories are explained, but the explanations defy reason. They just do. And the books, there are some books that I have been reading on the subject that I've pulled some of these stories from. Other books on strange kidnappings by a gentleman by the name of Lyons, Lyons. And so I want to give him credit for a couple of the stories, and then other ones that I've collected over the years. So probably one of the strangest stories, certainly not the strangest, but one of, was told by, these are eyewitness accounts, people who wrote into him because he had been writing books on like Bigfoot encounters and stuff like this. And so I've had this experience too. People just don't know who to tell crazy stuff to, even if it's real, true crazy stuff, you know?
Right.
So they hedge their bets and they go, well, you talk about ghosts or Bigfoot or whatever. So maybe you won't think I'm insane. And it was kind of that deal. And he looked around and realized he had enough stories for some books. And so he began that process. Um, and this first story took place, the young woman who's talking about it says she grew up in a place called Cottage Cove, Oregon, and that, she witnessed the death of her boyfriend when she was a teenager in the most insane way. So there's an old historical bridge out there called the Chambers Covered Railroad Bridge, and it's out in the middle of nowhere, and it's isolated, and of course that's a great place for teenagers to hang out.
Of course.
So, that's just how it works. It works that way around here too. So all the kids would go out and kind of party and hang out and drink and what have you. And so one Saturday night, her and her boyfriend met up with about 6 other friends out there at the covered bridge, the railroad bridge, and they're having a good time. They're drinking a little, listening to music, dancing, just kind of hanging out and talking back and forth. Well, one of her friends is telling a story when her boyfriend tells her he's got to go pee. If it goes in, it has to come back out.
Right.
So he's been drinking a little bit and he has to go pee. So um, he steps away into the woods, and she's not really paying much attention because she's listening to this friend tell a story. And all of a sudden, a couple minutes later, out of nowhere, they hear him screaming. And he's screaming these mortal terror kind of screams. And they all kind of stop for a second. And then one of the guys was like, he's screwing with us. It's just screwing with us. And it stops for a few seconds. And then it starts again. And this time the screams are even louder, more intense. And they don't sound like they're messing. So one of the guys goes, look, either we're going to beat the crap out of him or he needs help. One of the two, we need to go find him. So the kids all pile together and they go back through the woods, back the direction they saw him head. And the guys are leading the way with the girls kind of clutched together behind them. And that's whenever they come across where he's at. And the girl that it was his girlfriend, she said that she kind of peeked over somebody's shoulder and she saw that there was her boyfriend on the ground, and on top of him was this huge thing. At first it looked like a human-sized grasshopper or cricket or something, but then as their eyes kind of adjusted to the darkness, she realized it was an arachnid, a spider, the
Oh my.
largest spider she'd ever seen in her life, the size of a man, bigger than a man even. And she said her boyfriend's digging into the ground, trying to push this thing off, trying to fight it, and he's screaming and screaming, and this thing's got a hold of him. When it sees them all coming and the flashlight's coming, the spider picks him up and takes him away like he's nothing. And she estimates her boyfriend was 5'10" and about 180 pounds. And he moved so quickly with this man that it was insane. Well, of course, everybody just freezes for seconds. Your brain's got to try to absorb what you just saw.
Sure. Yeah.
And one of the guys yells, we got to help him. And she's screaming, help him, we've got to help him. And everybody they don't know what to do. They're scared, being something to pick him up could pick them up too. So they sort of stutter around and they're talking about it and they're trying to figure it out. And then the screaming starts again. And They're like, we got to go. We got to go help him, man. There's just no question. I don't care if it's crazy shit. We got to go help him. So they take off in that direction. And that's the guy in the lead with the flashlight suddenly comes up, stops short, and yells, "Oh my God, it's him." He's literally woven into this huge web. He's still alive, but he can't move very much. It's like he's been anesthetized, which, if you know anything about some spiders, they bite and paralyze their victim. Usually a moth, not a man, but in
Right.
this instance, a man. And around them are these other giant webs, and they start to freak out, thinking, "Oh my God, we're going to get caught in one of these webs." So they actually turn around and they start heading back. There's nothing that they can do, and the spider is coming toward them suddenly. So they turn around, they run back the way they came. They This was right before cell phones became popular, so they didn't have a phone among them. They decided to go to the nearest house and get a phone. So they drive down the road a ways. One of the kids knew this one house. He went in and he's like, "Hey, I need your phone." They got it, gave him a wireless cordless phone, and out in the driveway they call the cops. Well, everybody's kind of dancing around though. We saw our friend get cut up, and carried off by a giant spider story, because that probably isn't going to get the cops there. And so
Right.
they just say, he got lost in the woods, and oh my God, we don't know what to do. We tried to find him, we couldn't find him, and you need to go get help. Well, the one person that wanted to tell everything was the girlfriend. She was scared and she didn't want anything left out. So she told them about the giant spider, and the cops she was talking to looked at her like she was nuts. About They went out into the woods, the police, they looked around, they even took dogs with them to see if they could find his scent trail. When they came back, the police officers, the officer that had talked to her, she ran up and she said, "Did you see it? Did you see it?" And he's like, "I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it." And she said it was like he suddenly understood, and she said, "I don't know what they saw, but what they would eventually list the case as is just a missing persons case." They never talked about it. Never made the papers. It never did anything. It just sort of lay there flat. And one of the things that, his name is Tom Lyons, what Mr. Lyons talks about repeatedly in his stories. Now, he doesn't do any dialogue. It's usually just the storyteller being the person who's sending the letter. And they make note of the fact that in these instances, the police don't do anything. The families and the people who are witnesses either disappear or become extremely quiet. And it's that way with this particular story. She's like, they would have thought we were insane. They didn't say anything like that about us. What they did tell us was that he was a missing person, and they didn't want to say anything else.
Why would, well, the first thing I'm thinking is, okay, cover up. But why would somebody want to cover up something like that?
Try telling the public that there's a 10-foot spider out in the woods that's sucking people dry.
Well, that would certainly keep the kids away from the railroad bridge.
It would, but a lot of the things that are odd that have happened, they always argue the powers that be, the government, the police, whatever, on the federal level, that we couldn't handle it. On the local level, I honestly believe that they probably were just as overwhelmed as everybody else and don't know what to say, so they just say nothing.
Well, especially like a police officer or something like that. I
Yeah,
mean, you're in a position of authority, and do you want to lose your credibility by
sure.
spouting this otherwise, unbelievable tale?
Right. It's the same reason that airline pilots and Air Force military and stuff like that wouldn't tell UFO stories, even though they would later on, when they retired, say, "No, I had these experiences. Now that they can't fire me, I'm going to tell the stories."
Right.
But at the time, their credibility, their ability to earn a living is all kind of wrapped up in staying with the normal narratives. So I don't necessarily blame the police officers. Some of the stories that I'm telling tonight are beyond crazy. Um, but they are eyewitness accounts. You can take them or you can leave them. And most things in the paranormal are like that. You can take it or you can leave it. But there are enough of versions of it that over the course of time, it's a possible answer. I never think that any one answer is going to fit for how come people disappear. There's got to be 100 different answers. You know, some people just disappear on their own. Some people are kidnapped by crazy people or traffickers or whatever. Some people, believe it or not, it is believed some people are kidnapped and taken by Bigfoots, stuff like that. Some people stumble into holes. I think some people actually end up in altered dimensions and things like that. There's 1,000 answers. This is just the answer for this one and maybe a few others.
Yeah, I'm sitting here with it, speechless.
It
I
gets better.
cannot even process a response to that.
It gets better. So the next story, also one of Mr. Lyon's stories, is about two boys who were twins. Their parents both worked at home. And so in the daytime, whenever the parents were working, the kids had to be kind of quiet. So they had outfitted a room in the basement as a playroom. It had, monitors in it so they could keep an eye on the kids, make sure they weren't doing something bad, or hurting each other or themselves. And the boys were, about 8 years old and 7 years old, somewhere in that range. And it had all the toys and all the stuff, and they had it set up so that there was like a play area for coloring and an area for like building Lego houses and different things. And then they would come in on their break times and check on the boys and make sure they had everything they needed. So these two boys are down in their playroom, and they're playing and having a good time. And then all of a sudden, there was a window in the wall. The window comes open and the screen bends inward as though something's pushing on it. When the boys look up, they see this creature. It looks like a reptilian, but it's snake-like in its movements, its undulating movements. Its face is snake-like. And it comes down into the room, and it's huge, just huge. And it's got, hands and feet, but it moves with this undulating, swaying movement. And on its hands are protruding, not claws, but almost like a needle that shoots something into the boy that's closest to its neck. And it's like almost like it's paralyzing the child. The child screams, drops his blocks he's playing with, and his brother just backs up in horror. Again, how could you make sense out of this, right? And it picks up the boy, and it slithery walks back to the window and up and out the window. This thing has got to be 7 feet long. The boy that's left in the basement starts screaming at the top of his lungs. His parents come running. They're oh my God, what's wrong? What's wrong? And where's your brother? And then they see the window with the bent in screen, and their thoughts that somebody broke in and stole their child.
Right.
And
Right.
dad goes out and he starts looking, thinking he can pick up the trail at the broken window and keep going. Meanwhile, mom's calling the police, and she's like, oh my God, somebody broke into our children's playroom and took our son. And and she's going on. And then of course eventually dad comes back, and he hasn't gotten any sign of their boy. And the only witness is the other little boy. So the police talk to him, the psychiatrist talk to him, his parents talk to him, and he tells the same story every time. The story about the slithery reptilian thing. And they don't know what to make of it. They don't know how to embrace it. The psychiatrist says, well, maybe he transposed this man into a snake-like monster. The police are like, no, son, you got to tell us the truth. The parents are like, God, honey, we got to find your brother. This is important. You can imagine the pressure on this poor kid, you know. And in the end, he says, I know it was a reptilian. I have no idea if they're native to our planet. I have no idea where they come from. I only know that that's what took my brother. And nobody would believe me at the time. And again, you can understand why.
Of course.
So, and I have to tell you, there's even more bizarre stories, which, maybe we'll get into some of them another day, but it's just insane. Some of the stories that have been talked about. So we'll move on to another set of stories. So there was this story in a different forum that was about a little girl who grew up in New York City in Manhattan. And in her apartment with her family lived, she was always afraid of the closet. Now, a lot of kids are afraid of the closet or the door to the attic or the boogeyman under the bed or, 1,000 different things. And she would wake up in the middle of the night and see little green eyes in the shadows in the corner of the room watching her sleep, which is absolutely unnerving. So one night she's laying in bed and the closet door clicks open and this green ball of light, she calls it an orb of light, goes floating through the room to the corner, and she's watching it. And as she's watching, it's almost like it's self-illuminating. So even though it's sort of dark in her room, she can see it very well. And then out of nowhere, the light orb becomes feet just hanging in the air. And then legs and a torso and a little person. And she described him as wearing, he was all covered, he was all green. He had a green jacket, a green vest, and then a white beard that kind of glowed with a green glow. And he had a little pointed hat. He was a leprechaun or a dwarf or whatever you want to call him,
Gnome.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Beady little eyes and a little pointy nose. It was exactly what the caricatures from history or have described. And she said he looked like a gremlin or a gnome or something. And in the corner was a pair of her father's shoes. He had sat in there to keep him out of the way. And this thing went over to the shoes and tried to put them on, but every time it would walk, his feet were so tiny they would pull right out of the shoes, kind of like watching a little child trying to walk in his daddy's shoes. But this thing got very frustrated and angry, and she said it kind of got angry and he started yelling, and it scared her, and he gave up on the shoes, and it realized that she was watching it suddenly, and it vanished as he heard her mother walking back because she began to cry. And she said, I've never seen him again. But I've come across other accounts where the being has said, come with me or follow me or you're mine, and have taken them or tried to take them.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's a scary thought that these beings are, I don't know, they're dimensional or what they are, but they seem to want to take, and I think it's not always children. The next story will illustrate that, but often children that they want. I don't know if it's because they're easier to handle because they're smaller or what it is, because it appears in the next story they might have bit off more than they can chew. So this next story comes from Australia, and took place in 1984. This house was a new one. It was like around 10 years old. And the lady that rented the house or lived in the house had two children. She never did drugs. She was not that lady. She was the hard-working, serious type. So she had to go on a business trip with a couple of her colleagues, and she had made arrangements with a neighbor to babysit the kids for a couple days. When she would get back, it would be late in the evening, and she had made arrangements that she could pick the kids up the next morning. But she sleeps all the way back from this business trip in the plane. So she decides that she's awake, the kids aren't there, she's going to just kick back, relax a little bit, watch a little TV, and she goes in and lays down on she's on her bed, and immediately she feels this horrible fatigue and she falls completely asleep. And when she wakes up, she's almost like she's a numb. She can't feel, she can't move. And there are these beings about 2.5 feet high, and she sees them and they're talking, and she can't tell what they're saying, but they're talking, and they're pulling on her legs like they're trying to drag her off the bed. And there were several of them. She estimates maybe 5 or 6. Now the drawers, or the doors to the wardrobe, it had those sliding doors where you have to open them and slide them in inside of each other. The left hand side was opened, and they were pulling her like they were trying to get her in there, and she got the distinct impression that they were trying to drag her into the wardrobe, and she could tell only one word, and it was hurry, 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 hurry. So she lifted up her head and she looked at them, and she's like, they're really little and they're pulling, and she should have been scared, and she's like, I was numb, I didn't feel anything, and I fell asleep again. When she woke up the second time, she was upside down on the bed, her feet being at the pillow section, and they're tugging on her arms, trying to pull her off the bed. And she could see the wardrobe open, she could see them, she could feel their hands, but she was completely numb. And she fell back asleep. And she said, I know some time had lapsed, but it felt like this was taking hours. And when she woke up again, she was almost halfway off the bed, and her feet were still at the bottom again, and they'd pulled her down to the point where her thighs were kind of hanging off the edge of the bed. And she thought, they're trying to get me in that closet. Yeah, if I'm not careful, gravity's going to knock me on the floor. And she's like, it was distant thoughts, almost disjointed. And she said, suddenly I just knew that I didn't want to go into that closet with them. I knew it was terrifying. And she said, and I just forced myself somehow to stand up. And I started yelling, I'm not going with you. I'm not going with you, and kicking at him. And then they kind of pulled back and looked at her in surprise, like, how could she be fighting them? And then ran into the closet. And she said they dove like they were diving down through the floor and were gone. And then a few seconds after they were gone, whatever kind of spell they had her under kind of broke. And she became extremely emotional. She was scared to death. She was crying. She ran out of the house down the road, just to get away from that spot. Like she needed to hide from them. Finally calmed down enough. She got back to the house, pulled the phone outside, and called the friend who had dropped her off, one of the people she had been on that business trip with, and told him there was something going on at her house and she needed help. Could he come and get her? And after he took her to his home and told her she could spend the night, because she was really terrified, she told him about the little men and women, and he said, she's like, I know you're not going to believe me. And he told her the next day, he said, I know the story's insane, I get it, but I have never seen anybody so frightened in my life. Whatever it is you thought you saw, or you saw, terrified you. And that's why I told you you could stay the night, because the idea of making you go back into that house just seemed wrong to me. So the next day she goes into the house, she looks, there's no hole in her closet, there's no anything. And that's the only time she ever saw them. But as her kids grow up, one day she says to them, she's convincing herself that it's just, it was some sort of bizarre nightmare. And she says to her daughter, like back in 1984, that time you went and stayed at the neighbors, I had the weirdest experience. And her daughter says to her, are you talking about the little people in the closet? And she goes, excuse me? She's like, Mom, why do you think my brother and I always ran back that hallway and dove past the closet by the bathroom? So it turned out that her closet and the closet in the hallway backed onto each other and
Right.
shared a common wall. And the little girl, is now a teenager, and she tells her mom they had seen these beings, and these beings had tried to pull on them, and it scared them, and they just instinctually knew no adult would believe them. So they decided to just keep it to themselves and protect themselves. So they would go back the hall together, and they would run like crazy past that closet where these things came out of. And she's like, I never knew. And she said, and I felt like I was always that mom that was always careful, that I was always, willing to watch for my kids. And she's like, I never saw it. I never saw their fear. I never saw any of that. And then, here's her daughter saying, we were terrified, and you just didn't know.
Somebody who has, like me, who has seen little beings
Yes.
when I was younger, that's not too far fetched. Although none of them ever tried to take me, pull me, anything like that. They just stood and stared. Yeah.
So, when I saw that story, I knew you would understand, like the one about the little green eyes sitting and standing there and watching her sleep. I thought about your story about having seen that thing that stared at you.
Yeah, and there's just the green light. I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around that, thinking like, okay, what could cause? Trying to think scientifically, what could
Right.
cause, something like that, because that's, I hate to use the term magic, but I mean, to anybody coming up against advanced science that they don't understand would say that's magic.
Yeah. And I have to tell you, the common supposition that orbs are ghosts is just a supposition. They seem to occur in the same spaces. But I've seen orbs that were green. I've seen orbs that were pink. I have a picture from a bowling alley. There's a picture of two of these orbs, and they're dancing in unison. And you see them, and it's called an orb trail, and it's like a light trail, and it's long, and they're green, and they just dance around, and it's reflected off that highly polished bowling alley floor. So whatever it was solid enough to create a reflection.
Or self-illuminating. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
Interesting.
fascinating photograph caught at like 3 o'clock in the morning when the facility was closed, and I was only about 4 people in the building. Three of them were in one room, and the other person, actually it was my son, my oldest son, who had walked into the bowling alley part and was just snapping pictures. He was about 17 or 18, and when he came back, he handed me the camera, didn't realize he got anything, and I was sitting there going through them, and I'm like, where did this come from? And he's like, in there, I just took it. I just took like 20 of them, and that was the only picture. The one before, there's nothing. The one after, there's nothing, and they were taken in bursts. So it should have been in all of the pictures, maybe moved slightly, but in all the pictures, and it wasn't.
And he didn't see them
He did
with the
not
naked
see
eye.
them.
Hmm. Quite interesting. I mean, that's different than an experience like the Marfa lights, Marfa, Texas, where, I mean, people see those. I mean, people come from all around just to see those, and when they do show up. So,
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, this story, and it's not in by any way isolated. So the next story is about this young woman who tells the story when she was young, that her and her sister would be visited by a spirit, and she calls him a gnome or a demon, that he was small, he had a gray beard and a pointed hat. He would always come around darkness, and he would stand in the room and he'd say, follow me into the woods. And he would repeat it to her over and over. Her sister barely remembers it. Like when she talked about it with her sister as an adult, her sister's like, oh, that just slightly, that kind of rings a bell, but I don't remember much. But he would always tell her the same thing, follow me into the woods, follow me into the woods. And she said one night she was outside and she was at the neighbor's pool. Her mom had taken her sister in the house. The other neighbors, were still there to keep an eye on all the kids. And but something had happened to her sister, so her mom took her over, was going to come right back to get her. And so she's sitting there by the pool, and she said, I saw it was getting dark, and they were starting to shut stuff down for the evening, the neighborhoods and that were together there. And she said, I saw him, and he was beckoning to me outside. It was the only time she ever saw him outside. And he said her name, and he said, come with me, come with me. You need to come with me. And she said, I felt so compelled. I stood up and I took a few steps forward. And then it was like this instinct kicked in, and I was petrified, and I yelled, no. and turned around and ran from my house, and everybody was looking at her like she was crazy. What the heck? Nobody else saw him, nobody else heard him. And she said, I've always wondered if he was real, if he was a demon. Was he trying to, get me to follow him so he could possess me? I don't know what he was. All I know is that he scared me more than anything I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I would be scared too. I know when the little gnome that I saw, I mean, it was terrifying. And similar, my brother, a year and a half younger, I mean, as kids, we shared bedroom, and he would also see them, but later in adult life, he is a vehement denier that he ever saw them.
Oh,
So he's just kind of blank that out. He said, nope, never saw them.
that's interesting. A lot of people, they do that. They do the I'm not gonna admit it. And I think it's a self-preservation technique. I can't make sense of it in my world, therefore it didn't happen,
Hmm.
kind of a thing,
A
And I
defense
get it.
mechanism. Yeah.
It is. It's a defense mechanism. I think that we're going to end with this last story. So this was a story told by a young man who, when his family bought two old cottages back up in the woods, this would have been in the middle of nowhere. So you had to walk up this trail. It wasn't even cut wide enough for a car to get up it. So they had actually, they would go up to they called it the compound. And they were trying to take the best of these two houses and put it together and make a house. And, it was going to be like their homestead kind of a deal. So they had a horse and they had a wagon, and they would drag this wagon up with the horse, and they'd stay for several days at a time working on it, and then go back down and work their jobs, and then go back up when they could get a few days off and work on this place. So they were up there in the compound back in the woods, and he said that it was always a little misty and foggy up there, but this one night it got really weird, and this fog came rolling in so thick, and at the same time the horse began to like cry out and scream as though it was frightened of something. So his dad went and got the horse and tied it to the wagon, and they were actually sleeping in the wagon. And the horse got so crazy that his dad had to get out again to try to calm the horse, thinking this horse is going to pull the wagon over if we don't calm it down. I need to do something. And, also trying to not get stomped, frankly, because a horse that's in a frenzy could kill you. So his dad's
Easily.
trying to do this. I'm sorry?
I say easily. Yeah.
Yeah, easily. They're a very, very big animal. And so it's him, his brother, his mom, and his dad. And the horse is like screaming and carrying on, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's this huge bang, like it vibrated the structure, kind of a bang. It was he uses the word colossal, and there were three more bangs, bam, 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 shattering the night. And this fog rolled in around them, and the bangs were in the fog. They literally were in the fog, and they were terrified. So they just laid still. The horse calmed down suddenly, and Dad told him, he said, just stay put till morning. Don't anybody go outside for anything. So come morning, they get out, and their nearest neighbor was about a mile away. It was an old woman, and she came hobbling up the lane to check on them. And they said to her, did you hear anything? And she said, oh, it was the fog. It happens sometimes up here. Yeah, she's like, those big bangs you heard, it comes in the fog. We don't know what it is, but when that fog comes in like that, you'll hear that crashing. We don't know if something's trying to come through or trying to suck us up, but that's a good night to stay in the house. Anyone who goes outside in that fog, they're bound for trouble.
Okay. And that wouldn't be the first story about fog. I mean, there's Stephen King.
Yeah.
The fog story too. But in that it was creatures. But, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I have to tell you, there's a lot of stories about people walking through fog and disappearing and never coming back. myths that wrap around them, and that's the last you see of them. There's literally dozens and dozens of stories. We'll probably end up doing an entire episode of this kind of stuff. And I find it fascinating that people disappear in such strange ways. There's a story about a judge in New York. His name was Judge Crater. Excuse me, Carter. I apologize, Judge Carter. And he's at dinner in New York City with his friends. This would have been late 1800s. And he gets out of dinner. He's talking to his friends. He's very jovial. And he says, you know, good night to everybody. He walks across the street. His one buddy's kind of watching him go. He sees him walk onto the sidewalk and go past the horse and coach that's sitting there. And he never comes out the other side. Ever. So his friend goes running over, thinking, well, did somebody drag him in the alley or something like that? And there isn't an alley. There's just a little tiny space
Oh,
between the houses, certainly not big enough for him to go through. You know, in New York City, a lot of the places are built very tight upon each other. And they never find him. He never turns up again. So I again come back to the never-ending question of what happens to people to make them disappear. You know, what happened to the boy feeding the chickens? What happened to the little girl Donna that disappeared at the beginning that I told you about? And there's 1,000 different answers, and these are just a few of them. Some of the other ones that I'll tell on other occasions will shock you even more than the stories I chose tonight. If you think the arachnid was terrifying, there's a couple stories even much more terrifying than that. And I don't know what all the answers are. I just know that I'm probably going to spend the rest of my life wondering, because how does that happen? How does it happen that a farmer's walking through a field? This is another story that's true. Farmer's walking through a field. His wife and kids are sitting on the porch watching him. It's a hot, lazy afternoon. And he's, you know, walking through the field toward them, coming in for the afternoon. And just like that little girl, Marjorie, just disappears. It looks like he stumbled and he's no longer there. And that is a real story. That truly happened to a family out in the Midwest. They never found him. He just disappeared. 100 of those stories. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those stories. There's one from Pennsylvania here. This will be a freebie, but there was a story from Pennsylvania from the late 1800s. It was a Christmas party, and this teenage boy was asked by his mom to go out to the well and get water to make, you know, for coffee and what have you, because you carried your water in. So it was a church Christmas party, and they were having it at this particular farmhouse because it was halfway between and large enough to accommodate everybody. And it was this kid's family. So the 17-year-old boy grabs up the buckets to go out to get water, and he starts toward the well, and then they hear this screaming. So the pastor and everybody comes running out, and there he is hanging in the air. And his feet are swinging, and he's slowly going higher and higher and higher up, and he's screaming, help me, help me, help me. And somebody tries to jump up and grab his leg, and they can't catch him, and he just keeps rising. The buckets are laying there on the ground, and he's fighting nothing. They see nothing. But he continues up until his voice fades away, and he disappears. There was no tracks in the snow, because it had snowed during the Christmas party, and you could see him going out, and then you see like a circular place where he was like fighting at it or turning around trying to figure out what was going on. And then the buckets are dropped, and then nothing. There's no footprints coming toward him. There's no anything, just the footprints coming from the house towards the well.
wow. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
His name was Oliver Lurch. And this happened, I believe it was Potter County, PA. The entire church testified to it. The police, you know, eventually were notified of it. He never surfaced anywhere.
Probably was not assumed to heaven. That's what I could think of.
You know, did aliens take him? Was there some mysterious force pulling him up for some other reason? I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, there are millions of people that that disappear. Millions. If you looked at the numbers, you would be horrified. Around the world, and they disappear in all these crazy ways. And I know that a large percentage are, you know, there's sex trafficking trafficking. There's, turning them into drug mules. There's people who commit suicide and hide to do it. There's 1,000 different things that happen, but we never look into the paranormal possible explanations. And when they are confronting us, we want to stay nice and safe in our little cocoon, so we just ignore them.
And file a missing persons report.
Exactly. So that was my episode for today.
Pretty good one, too.
Thank you. Subject I spend a lot of time on.
Okay. Well, if anybody has enjoyed this episode, please click the like button down below. If you're watching this through YouTube or through one of our other video channels. If you have friends, family who aren't subscribers, please ask them to subscribe. Click the subscribe button right down there, the little bell. Get notified whenever we publish new content. We have the Facebook page, The Paranormalist Podcast. And we have the email address, paranormalist@theparanormalistpodcast.com. Both of those will be down below in the description. For the audio-only podcast, they'll be in the information block as well. So please contact us. Let us know. Give us ideas for future episodes. Tell us your stories. We'd love to hear them.
I have been asked recently for an episode about cats. So anybody who has paranormal stories that involve cats, please let us know. We are now collecting cat stories. I know you have one. Yeah.
I do. And yeah, well, I'll save it for then. But
Okay.
yeah, I get to see him every so often. And just 2 nights ago, he made an appearance. Quite apparent.
Really?
Yes.
We'll have to talk about it whenever we do the episode.
Okay.
So with that, I wish everybody a good evening.
All right. Thank you, Patty. And you have a good evening as well.
Thank you.